Soon the rebels were streaming forward.
Dramatic advances today.
Forces attacked.
During the first few months of 2011, an unprecedented wave of demonstrations, protests and civil unrest swept through North Africa and the Middle East. A domino effect has seen over a dozen states experience revolutionary demands for government overhaul and democratic reform. These events have presented a unique set of circumstances for the news media. The challenge of accurate reporting in censored countries, the threat of state-sanctioned violence towards news teams, and the role of social media in orchestrating and documenting the revolutionary events. In turn, these circumstances have posed a unique set of questions. Is the threat of violence to reporters on the ground worth the risk of reporting? Can reporting remain impartial and accurate when under the control of foreign governments? Can amateur footage have the same validity as work by professional news teams? Which leads to the ultimate question. Has the Arab Spring changed the way the news media operates forever?
In Cairo on that, I think it was Wednesday, and there is nothing more dangerous than a mob. And that was one of the most dangerous situations I've ever been in, just for about 20 minutes or half an hour, because we were in a car, we were obviously Western, the car was loaded with cameras and so on, and we were surrounded by people who just wanted to lynch us. And we were very lucky that, in fact, the people who took our cameras were the army and not the mob.
I suddenly scratched my head in the middle of Tahrir Square when things were getting a bit ugly and thought to myself, I think I'm breaking just about every rule that we have been passed down.
We have to set out and give those who are going out into the field, into these really dangerous places, everything that we can to make them safe. But the problem is that the circumstances change. We had a team in Libya who, Bill was there at the time, Alex Crawford and her team, and they were in the hotel on a Friday afternoon, and everybody broke out of the hotel. And they broke out, of course, not with flat jackets or helmets or actually with anything. And everyone was looking for, a story on a Friday after Friday prayers. They decided to go to Zawiya that day and ended up getting stuck in Zawiya when the Gaddafi troops moved in for 3 days and 2 nights, which was absolutely terrifying. And the reality is they were very lucky they got out and were witness to what went on there. But at Sky News and all the broadcasters, we're absolutely determined to equip people in the right way. But the circumstances on the ground changed so rapidly during all of these uprisings.
My colleagues from BBC Arabic were arrested near Zawiya, and in that team, the reporter, a Palestinian guy, was badly beaten, and all 3 of them were severely mistreated severely ill-treated by the Libyans.
There were a lot of mock executions. They blindfolded us, just gaffer tapes, and then we seen other people from Zawiya. They've been tortured, broken ribs, all smashed faces. They were with us all the time, and it was horrible.
That, I think, was a very clear message to people here, which was, you can't mess around and break the rules, because if you do, and if we pick you up, then you might be in some big trouble.
I feel sorry for even torturers, because they've been forced to do that kind of things. Nobody decided, wake up in the morning and say, oh, I'd like to torture people, then beat them or rape them. It's the system creates that kind of things. It's not their fault, it's the system's fault.
The security of journalists is clearly, it's paramount that it's taken seriously so that people can remain in the situation where they keep bearing witness to the situation that they're there to cover. So that's clear. Is reporting the Arab Spring, as it's become known, is it dangerous? Yes, it's very dangerous. Statistically, there have been over 300 attacks on journalists operating in North Africa since the uprisings began. According to the CPJ, there are now more attacks against journalists than any time since the Bosnian War in the 1990s. So it's not simply that we feel it's more dangerous, there actually are more attacks against journalists.
In Egypt, the danger was state thuggery, that there was a point where Mubarak, the president, could not control the situation other than finding quite extreme methods of doing so.
For the first time, Egyptian police didn't really care about looking vulgar in the street and being filmed beating people and being filmed doing what I call atrocities. I was beaten by a steel bar over my head, and exactly in this place, all of a sudden I found blood flowing out, and I kind of believed, this is it. I'm not getting out safe, I'm not getting out alive.
It was a bit like covering a series of biblical plagues covering the Egyptian revolution. One day he deployed riot police, the next day it would be the army who didn't fire on the people, so the next day he deployed thugs. He was trying the president was trying different ways of trying to shut us down.
There have been occasions in an urban situation during the Arab Spring when it would be utterly inappropriate to be walking around wearing something as visible as a bulletproof jacket, because first of all, you're probably in more danger of being attacked because people want your bulletproof jacket.
Because we arrived, and of course you couldn't get into the country with a flak jacket or a stab jacket, or indeed with a large camera. You could only have anything which would sit in your pocket or whatever. Security
for journalists, it's a very diverse and complicated interlocking issue. It's not about what flak jacket you have or what safety protocols you're necessarily adhering to at any one time.
Safety is never entirely guaranteed. There are certain things you can do to mitigate it, and there are certain things that news organisations obviously do, but when you have a crew out in a certain place, you can never entirely take away a danger.
War is about chaos. That's what war is all about, and it's not a safe environment. It's a horrible place to be. So all of these structures that have, there's endless amount of stuff around journalists who are having to cover wars, most of which is a very good thing. Nowadays we have much better bulletproof equipment, we've got good helmets, we've got good body armour.
In a lot of countries we take security guards with us who tell us in a more professional way what risk is worth taking and what risk isn't. But I'm actually quite experienced, so I don't worry about that too much, and I'm surrounded by very experienced people. And what I tend to say to my team is, are you happy coming with me to do this? And if people are not happy, they have the freedom to say so, and we make a collective decision.
The truth is, as I think Bill would testify, is that you reach a moment where you know full well it is not safe, but you don't have many choices about what you're doing. I mean, there isn't actually any obvious retreat. You've just got to go on. I mean, in Cairo, we had this big dispute about whether we should stay on in the Hilton Hotel, which had this glorious overlook onto what was happening in Tahrir Square. And most people left, but I actually judged it personally the safest place to be.
All of us have a responsibility to deploy people who've got the experience to make those judgments on the ground. It has to be a golden rule that people in London do not tell people in the field the decisions to make. The people in the field are best equipped to call the story and to call the situation. And it ill behoves anybody thousands of miles away to tell them what to do. The mistake is to send people into the field in the first place who aren't equipped to take those decisions.
If anybody thinks they can cover a war without exposing themselves to personal risk, then they've got a very naive idea about what war involves.
The way journalists are, they're the kind of people who don't do it as a 9-to-5 job, they do it as a vocation. They have a passion for it, and they want the best story.
I hate to become the story, okay? However, became an evidence in that story, if I became part of that story that can't be missed, then I have to just go out to the world and do it.
Now, if somebody feels that their sense of identity is part and parcel of accurately describing, a revolution as it happens, and of giving a voice to people who may be powerless or underrepresented or subject to political intimidation, if that's their raison d'etre, then it's very hard to turn around to them and say you shouldn't be doing this job because it's too dangerous.
I love being in that kind of places because you can see something nobody can able to see. I wouldn't say seen this if I wasn't there. It's just I don't know. I love this job. It's my passion. I don't know how to say it, but I love it.
Entered a new phase of reporting, that there is something now profoundly different from what we're tasked with doing 15 years ago?
Clearly the phenomenon of Twitter, Facebook, the ability to record footage on mobile phones and to transmit it within instants poses both opportunities and dangers as well, because on the one hand you're able to get footage from places where you can't be, but there's the big problem of verification. And it's not just a problem exclusive to the Arab Spring. I mean, we had an instance recently in Ivory Coast. Our reporter received video, some of the most horrific, graphic video that I've ever seen, of people being burned alive. And the video was presented as an example of the atrocities that were being committed by troops loyal to Laurent Gbagbo. It transpired fairly quickly that this footage was not current footage at all. It was actually shot 2 years ago. It also wasn't even shot in Ivory Coast. These were pictures of people accused of witchcraft being burned alive in Kenya. I mean, they were horrendous pictures, but they were nothing to do with that particular conflict. And that really reiterated for us, it really underlined the need for vigilance.
I think with such an extraordinary, unprecedented series of events, it's incredibly difficult for the international news media to understand entirely and instantly what's going on. No one else did, so why would the journalists? And the speed and the rapidity both of the events and of the news cycle and news process at the moment makes it even harder.
In the last few months, my job has completely changed because I now rely increasingly on footage which has been posted on YouTube or on Facebook, or I've seen via Twitter, posted by people I don't know, that I can't verify, and I've now had to start bringing people in to help me sort out what is real, what isn't, what's new and what isn't.
There is more material available for journalists to sift through and use or not use, and that can only be a good thing. And most of the most responsible networks constantly say we have not been able to verify this for ourselves, and that's a very wise thing.
When there aren't any pictures, we need pictures, and so we go out and get them on YouTube. And we here put a great deal of effort into trying to make, finding someone who recognised the street, checking the accents of people, what they're saying, and so on. So that, we always put it out with a health warning.
I think what's happening on the internet is that there are lots of opportunities for the news industry to aggregate content with lots of eyewitnesses, right? So what's happening here is you have the ability to see the things from the eyes of the people that are going through, you know, the events.
At the end, even if you have social media that will present some kind of the informational reports, whether it is truthful or not, you need to be verified or to be more credible through getting the information to a media outlet that's working traditional way. And I think, in a sense, that was very important, that social media more or less was important in getting the information quickly because of the instant updates, and at the same time getting the media to be interested in the conflict, whatever it is, or the uprising itself. And I think it succeeded in getting the media interested in the Arab Spring in general.
Think back to Egypt, for example, where the departing regime tried very hard to block news media. They chased reporters, they confiscated cameras, and they prevented even broadcasting of many stations through satellite links and so on. When that happened, you know, the use of technologies like YouTube basically allowed everybody to tell their story and tell it in a way that's exactly as they saw it.
The pace and volume of the production of this kind of material means that it is now integral, it's automatic, it's used instantly and extensively by all news organisations, public and private. It's become part of the storytelling process, and that means that everyone from Sky to Al Jazeera doesn't just use it accidentally, it's now built into news gathering, it's built into what correspondents do.
It's actually easy and lazier just to grab the images and the quotes that are coming out of Twitter and out of Facebook and out of mobile phones. So there's no question that news organisations need to be wary of both the accuracy and the potentially unrepresentative nature of what they're getting.
It's about knowing who the source is on Twitter. Who's tweeting? Do we trust, know, understand where that person is, know that person, understand where they're coming from? Have others picked up on it and verified it? Have we done it ourselves? Have we made phone calls and checked it out?
I follow a terrific guy in Bahrain who seems to send amazing information, which tends normally to be true. But I have no idea who he is.
In Misrata the other day, when the claims that the airport had been retaken by the rebels, and it came out and it was like, what should we do with that? And CJ Chivers was there and was there within minutes and tweeted it. And it was just one of those wonderful moments. We know who he is. We know that he's actually borne witness to that. We absolutely know it's true.
It doesn't replace journalism. It complements the journalism. And we are sort of incredibly privileged to be able to have people in an awful lot of places around the world, but they are never going to be everywhere. No matter how many bureaux we have, no matter how many fantastic correspondents we appoint, there is always going to be something somewhere where we don't have somebody. And that's the point at which the value of eyewitnesses who tell us what's going on comes into play.
Look at Syria. Everything we are transmitting from Syria is coming from the ether, from cyberspace. Nothing is coming from us.
I mean, remember back to the rebellion there in 1982 in the town of Hama, when President Assad Sr. killed somewhere between 15 and 20,000 people. There was no footage of that. Nothing appeared on YouTube which wasn't invented. Today in Hama, if his forces are out on the streets, we know about it. So we as journalists should absolutely embrace this technology, but we've also got to be very, very careful.
And the big fear for all of us in broadcasting is that we'll be caught out and we'll broadcast some footage that we couldn't quite verify as much as we wanted to because it was strong footage, and it turns out not to be a fake. It hasn't happened as far as I know, but we are increasingly reliant on people we don't know.
That raises actually quite important questions for the professionalism of the way in which that information is interpreted. To what extent are the people at that end, at the receiving end, filtering that information and saying, hang on a minute, We can't just put that out raw. We can't just say this is what is happening. We have to find out to what extent it represents the reality of what is happening.
The fact-checking, the degree of verification necessary, and the integrity behind reporting is in general missing in the citizen. He or she has not had the training, and they do not live by the quality of what they deliver.
The requirements on professional journalists have not changed in the sense of thinking about the way in which they interpret the images and the provenance of the images and the information that they're getting.
What has changed is that we are now in partnership with people in countries which we can't visit because we're not allowed in, who are filming stuff and then posting it on the internet, and we are then making reports out of that footage. I think this whole thing started after the disputed election in Iran a couple of years ago, when footage started coming out, and that phenomenon has now spread to the Arab world.
Twitter and blogging and YouTube posts, they're a very useful element within the propaganda war of the revolutionary movement. They're a useful tip-off system to us, but they are in no way a substitute for somebody deconstructing the story and trying to figure out what is actually happening.
I worry that we get a false picture of what's going on in Syria. That actually all the signs of, and I've had somebody in there for a week who came out a week ago, and their message was that actually, on the streets of Damascus, there's still some support, not for the regime, but for Assad. And actually the regime, the security establishment, are doing a pretty damn good job at shutting this down. And I'm not sure that what we're getting is presenting our audience with the true picture here.
But I have to say, the Syrian example, without that footage, we would not be reporting it at all. And that is at least allowing us to report something about what's going on in Syria. So I think we have to see the benefits as well as being cautious and as well as understanding what we're not getting.
In a way, most of that reporting is not actually a couple of people pausing and talking. Most of that reporting is just a true picture of what's going on. Somebody who has a video camera on his phone that basically captures a police car ramming through some protesters, right? That's the truth. And by aggregating millions and millions of clips, what's happening is that now you're going to get an augmented view of the truth from all aspects, from all sides.
In some ways, social media makes that picture more complex, but I also think that it adds diversity, and it adds a kind of context of real people talking about what's going on that can only help in that explanatory process.
The point about citizen journalists or non-professional journalists, let's call them that, people are going out and reporting events on their doorstep, is that they're also going through a process of giving things a shape and a narrative and trying to make sense of it. And some of that journalism isn't very good, but some of it is probably better than some of the standard stuff that professional journalists make. It depends on who the citizen journalist is, and it depends on who the professional journalist is. But that active contextualisation and trying to make sense of a very difficult, complicated, fast-moving situation is, I think, a right that they have as well as professional journalists, of course.
You're getting a much more multilateral, multifaceted sense of what's going on. But it still means, it still doesn't mean that you shouldn't simply abdicate any professional journalistic responsibility to interpret what you're getting.
There's no no doubt that people have access, if they choose, to deeply disturbing imageries about these kind of violent events happening around the world. And in the past, the kind of mainstream traditional news media that I worked in was extraordinarily squeamish about showing anything upsetting, because in a sense people didn't have a choice about the imagery that they were going to witness.
I'm not sure actually the sort of social media revolution is actually promoting a more graphic coverage of news. I mean, if you look back to, I mean, you know, I worked a lot in West Africa in 2002. Films that I made were broadcasting images of prisoners being executed and then eaten. The execution of Samuel Doe in 1989, an incredibly you know, visceral event that was filmed and very widely broadcast. There is a long legacy of very graphic images on television, and I don't think this is promoting or increasing them. I think it's just absolutely beholden that we use them in the right way to tell the right story. It's context and analysis which is important.
This explicit kind of imagery does have a very important role online of playing witness to events. When the storekeeper burns himself, when somebody is beaten to pulp by the Egyptian secret police, it is important that that is recorded and that people can access it.
There are instances where there is excessive violence or hate speech and so on and so forth. And we have what we call a community guidelines, right? So the community guidelines will automatically take some of that away. The community will flag videos they think that are not you know, in line with what they're expecting. And by flagging them, basically it goes through the community guidelines and then gets removed or edited out.
There is an argument to say actually perhaps more graphic images, raw footage, unedited footage, which people have access to, might actually do the job in conveying the reality, the full reality of the horror of war.
I don't feel pushed into putting more and more graphic images on TV. I think the really difficult thing is on a 24-hour news channel, it's, you know, where are your watersheds and what are they and where is the material going out. There is an awful lot of very nasty stuff out there. People don't want it in their sitting rooms, but they do need to see what's going on, and it's absolutely about hitting it right, getting it right, and that is beholden on us to make sure that we're doing that.
It's really great that people have many more ways of seeing and consuming media content than they ever have before, and that is the fundamental crux of our job, is to get the news out to as many people as possible.
It gives a more variety of news, how it is covered. Possibly now most of the media outlets are more or less in competition with social media and getting the news more accurately and also verifying it. That's why I think the media outlets are going to embrace this movement.
I would argue that there's so much content out there that the need for people to actually give it shape and form and context and analysis is still very important. And so I hope that we're not about to become an extinct species. And I think that, you know, the ability to tell stories is very much the task of the foreign correspondent, but of course with a lot more content out there that we can give form and shape to.
I think there's going to be increased partnership with other forms of media between, say, Channel 4 News and social media. Increased use of citizen journalism, people shooting footage in countries that we can't get to or can't afford to get to.
You're going to get an increase in news channels, instant 24-hour news, powerfully impacting on events around the world as they happen. But at the same time, you're going to get a massive growth in real people communicating through social networks and so on. And the two are going to become much more networked into each other.
We will move ever further along this line of relying on citizen journalists and perhaps using journalists as the people to contextualise things.
What I think will happen is that news organizations be this the printed press or television, radio, whatever, are going to have some kind of contracted citizen journalists everywhere that they can train and that they accept responsibility for their work.
The professional journalist, the professional editor, is actually more required today than it ever has been before. Because in a sea of information, which of it do we trust? Which of it can we trust? And the role of the trusted third party, the role of the known broadcaster, the known editor, the known journalist becomes the voice that finally is heard and trusted.
Twitter's wonderful, Facebook, YouTube, fantastic, great tools, but nothing replaces the basics. Nothing replaces us being there. Because when I went into Zawiya on the final day, there were no people left in the center of Zawiya to tweet or YouTube or Facebook. They were all gone. Many of them had been killed, a lot of them had been arrested. And we had to be there, because if we weren't there, nobody was there, and nothing basically replaces the old-fashioned boots on the ground, be there.